Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. First of all, thank you for all the members who joined Patreon. And second of all, if you also want to enjoy exciting stories early on with consistent updates, bonus scenes, and much more offers, you can join my Patreon for more fun. And second of all, those who can't join Patreon, your support on YouTube matters a lot to me as well. So don't forget to support me on YouTube. Now, moving forward, today's story has an obsessed emperor, a dramatic general, endless chaos, sweet family moments, and a plot twist nobody sees coming. So let's move forward with today's story.
Chapter 1. The General Died Like an Idiot. Lucien, ardent, had exactly 3 goals in life. Pay rent, eat decent food at least twice a week, and survive his delivery job without getting bitten by another customer's emotional support chihuahua. Honestly, he considered himself a very successful man. At 24 years old, Lucien lived a painfully average life. He delivered food around the city on his little scooter, survived entirely on caffeine and sarcasm, and spent most evenings reading trashy novels while complaining about the character's stupidity. It was peaceful, simple, reasonably happy, which was precisely why the universe apparently decided to ruin it. That night, after finishing his final delivery at around 1:30 a.m., Lucien was dragging himself home while internally debating whether instant noodles counted as self-care when something sparkled near a roadside bench. He stopped. A book sat there. Not an ordinary book either. It was glowing. Actually, glowing. Silver light shimmered across the cover like spilled stars, illuminating the empty street dramatically enough to look like the opening scene of a suspicious fantasy movie. Lucien stared at it, then immediately looked away. Nope. He continued walking. 3 steps later, he stopped again. His brain kept drifting toward the book. He sighed heavily. This is how white people die in horror movies. The street was empty. No people, no cars, no sounds except distant traffic and his own terrible decision-making skills. Against every survival instinct he possessed, Lucien walked back and sat on the bench. The moment he touched the book, the silver glow softened warmly beneath his fingers. Okay. That's mildly concerning. The cover had no title. Naturally, Lucien opened it anyway, because curiosity was humanity's greatest weakness. The story was absurd from the very beginning. An obsessive tyrant emperor, a terrifyingly beautiful general accused of being evil, political conspiracies, wars, assassinations, and somewhere between reading about the general bankrupting enemy nations by sending them invoices for psychological horse trauma, Lucien started laughing so hard he nearly fell off the bench. What kind of idiot wrote this? Then he reached the death scene. The general knowingly drank poisoned tea because he wanted to insult someone dramatically before dying. Lucien stared at the page in disbelief. He died because he prioritized aesthetics over survival? Suddenly, the book exploded with light. Blinding silver swallowed the street whole. Lucien barely had time to scream, "Oh, come on!" before everything went black. The first thing Lucien noticed when he woke up was the smell. Blood, incense, and expensive perfume. The second thing he noticed was that the bed beneath him felt softer than his entire apartment. Slowly opening his eyes, Lucien found himself lying in a luxurious room decorated with dark silk curtains and silver candlelight. Outside the distant windows, war. He could hear shouting, marching soldiers, steel clashing somewhere far away. Inside, silk pillows. Lucien blinked slowly. Either I died, or rich people are getting weirder. His body felt strangely weak as he sat up. Long silver hair slid over his shoulders. Lucien froze. "Excuse me?" He turned toward the nearby mirror. And unfortunately, the man staring back at him was devastatingly beautiful. Long silver hair flowed like liquid moonlight down his back. Pale skin without a single flaw. Sharp golden eyes framed by absurdly long lashes. A tiny beauty mark rested beneath soft lips that looked sculpted specifically to ruin lives. Lucien stared at himself for a full minute, then sighed. This man absolutely weaponized his face. Suddenly, memories crashed into his head violently. Wars, battlefields, court politics, the Empire of Edivane, and the novel. Lucien's eyes widened in horror. No! More memories flooded in. The general? The evil, cannon fodder villain. The Emperor's beloved obsession. The beautiful disaster who drank poison willingly because apparently dying dramatically was more important than basic survival instincts. Lucien clutched his head. He died because he wanted to insult someone artistically? At that exact moment, the room doors burst open. Several older attendants rushed inside, crying so hard one nearly tripped over the carpet. "General, you finally woke up. His Majesty is coming." Lucien immediately straightened. Ah, so this was his life now. Wonderful. If this world had dragged him here against his will, then he would become everyone's problem. The heavy room curtain suddenly parted, and Emperor Cassian Vale entered. The atmosphere changed instantly. Suffocating pressure filled the room so heavily, even breathing became difficult. The attendants immediately collapsed to their knees. Lucien finally understood why. Cassian Vale did not look human. He looked like a god that descended from heaven solely to make ordinary people insecure. Tall, broad-shouldered, pale golden skin glowing softly beneath candlelight. Long, silky gold hair cascaded down luxurious black robes embroidered with crimson dragons. His features were breathtakingly sharp. High nose bridge, elegant lips, eyes so crimson they looked almost unreal. Beautiful. Terrifyingly beautiful. The kind of face kingdoms would start wars over. Unfortunately, his behavior completely ruined the heavenly image. Because the moment Cassian saw Lucien awake, his cold expression melted instantly into something horrifyingly soft. Obsessed soft. The Emperor ignored every kneeling person in the room and walked directly toward Lucien like a starving man finding religion. Lucy Sizizzi immediately pointed at him. "I'm not your general." The room froze. Lucien continued fearlessly. "I transmigrated here against my will through that damn glowing book I got intrigued reading." One attendant made a choking sound. A guard looked seconds away from fainting. Someone in the back whispered prayers. Cassian, however, merely sat beside the bed calmly. Then gently cupped Lucien's face with both hands like he was holding something precious beyond reason. His crimson eyes softened impossibly. He leaned down, pressed a kiss against Lucien's forehead, and murmured warmly, "You slept too long, beloved. You're speaking nonsense, my love." Lucien stared at him, then immediately bit his hand, hard. The sharp teeth marks bloomed beautifully against Cassian's pale skin. Gasps erupted across the room. One attendant almost started crying again, but instead of anger, Cassian smiled. Actually, smiled. Like this was the greatest moment of his life. He slowly brushed Lucien's silver hair behind his ear and whispered lovingly, "Just the same. Lucien, this man is clinically insane. Cassian, for you, absolutely." The attendants looked like they wanted to resign from life itself. And somewhere in the far corners of the imperial palace, the surviving court officials collectively felt an ancient terror return. Because their general had awakened, and unfortunately, the emperor looked even more obsessed than before. The empire of Edivane was doomed, all over again. Chapter 2. The emperor is not beating the allegations. Lucien quickly realized three important things after transmigrating. First, the original general's reputation was somehow even more ridiculous than the novel described. Second, the emperor was completely insane. And third, this world might actually suit him disturbingly well. It had only been 1 week since Lucien woke up in the imperial palace, yet the servants already looked emotionally exhausted whenever he entered a room. Mostly because Lucien had decided if he was trapped here forever, then he would commit to being absolutely unbearable. The original general had apparently been feared throughout the continent for being evil. But after reviewing his memories, Lucien came to one simple conclusion. This man wasn't evil, he was just petty with military funding. The list of crimes against society was honestly incredible. The general once sent an enemy kingdom a 30-page invoice demanding compensation for emotional distress inflicted upon imperial war horses during travel. He publicly mocked nobles until grown men developed anxiety. He reorganized an irritating duke's ancestral library alphabetically by paper smell. And apparently once delayed an entire peace treaty because the ambassador arrived wearing shoes Lucien described as visually offensive to civilization. Honestly, iconic behavior. Naturally, Lucien decided to become worse. And Emperor Cassian Vale supported this decision wholeheartedly. Breakfast in the imperial palace had become a daily nightmare for everyone, except the two of them. That morning, Lucien sat lazily across from Cassian while staring judgmentally at his tea. Then he took one sip. His face immediately twisted in offense. "This tea tastes poor." The dining hall fell silent. Cassian calmly looked toward the trembling ministers nearby. Burn the tea province. A minister nearly collapsed. Your Majesty. That's an entire region. Cassian looked genuinely confused. And? Lucien nearly choked laughing into his cup. The minister looked seconds away from retirement. Meanwhile, Cassian simply reached over and wiped a drop of tea from Lucien's lips with terrifying tenderness. The palace staff had collectively stopped questioning things days ago. Their survival instincts were stronger than their curiosity. Soon the entire palace discovered another horrifying truth. The Emperor followed Lucien everywhere. Literally everywhere. Military meetings, training grounds, gardens, libraries, war councils. One time, Lucien walked into an armory at midnight just to test a theory. Cassian appeared 5 minutes later. Lucien narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Are you tracking me? Cassian looked deeply offended. Of course not. Pause. Then calmly. I simply know where you are at all times. Lucien stared at him. That somehow made it worse. Cassian smiled proudly like he'd been complimented. The worst incident happened during an official military inspection. Lucien was reviewing soldiers while dramatically criticizing everyone's posture. You stand like a depressed shrimp. That sword form offended me spiritually. If your enemies saw this technique, they would die laughing before you even attacked. The soldiers looked traumatized. Lucien felt wonderful. Then suddenly he sensed something strange. He turned around sharply and found Emperor Cassian silently standing behind a marble pillar, watching him. Lucien nearly jumped. Were you hiding? Cassian looked calm. No. A pause. Then with complete seriousness, I was waiting elegantly. Lucien stared at him in disbelief. That is somehow worse. Nearby generals silently prayed for divine intervention. None came. Meanwhile, the Emperor's obsession continued escalating catastrophically. Lucien had already known from reading the novel that Cassian was absurdly possessive. But witnessing it personally felt entirely different. The man had literally eliminated all possible romantic competition years ago. Out of fear that Lucien might someday marry someone else, Cassian had proceeded to marry nearly every eligible nobleman and noblewoman in the kingdom himself. Not out of love, out of strategy. Because according to him, if everyone else is already married, then no one can marry Lucien other than me. The terrifying part? Nobody could even argue against the logic. Officially, the empire declared this a political stabilization effort. Unofficially, the court called it the Emperor's psychotic mating ritual. It got worse. Cassian had now formally banned marriage proposals directed toward Lucien across the entire continent. Official reason: national security concerns. Lucien laughed for 10 full minutes after reading the decree. You threatened foreign kingdoms because someone might flirt with me? Cassian looked him dead in the eye. Yes. You're ridiculous. And yet you remain unmarried. Lucien nearly threw a pillow at him. Somewhere along the chaos, however, things slowly began changing. Lucien found himself growing comfortable here. Comfortable enough to stop questioning things. The palace halls no longer felt foreign. The servants already knew his favorite desserts. The soldiers greeted him proudly. Even his duties as general returned naturally, almost frighteningly so. The first time he stepped into a war strategy meeting, his body moved instinctively. Maps, troop formations, supply routes, tactical weaknesses, everything came effortlessly. Lucien himself looked mildly horrified. Why do I actually know what I'm doing? The room stared at him blankly. Cassian, meanwhile, looked at him like the sun personally rose for his entertainment. You've always been brilliant, beloved. Lucien rolled his eyes dramatically. Don't encourage me. I'm already becoming intolerable. Cassian reached for his hand immediately. You can become worse. And somehow, that ridiculous answer made warmth settle strangely in Lucien's chest. Because despite the insanity, despite the obsessive emperor following him like a giant dangerous wolf, despite the fact this entire world was objectively absurd, for the first time since arriving here, Lucien no longer felt like he was trapped. He felt like he had come home. Chapter 3. Weaponized Favoritism. Lucien discovered very quickly that Emperor Cassian Vale's obsession was not merely excessive. It was politically catastrophic and extremely useful. Dangerously useful. At first, Lucien tried not to abuse the Emperor's affection too much. That attempt lasted approximately 3 days. I dislike that, Duke. That was all Lucien said casually during breakfast one morning while buttering toast. No anger, no explanation. Just mild annoyance. Cassian didn't even look up from peeling grapes for him. Understood. Lucien forgot about it instantly. The next morning, however, the palace exploded into chaos after Duke Harrington mysteriously received an urgent imperial reassignment. New position, Senior Tax Supervisor of the Northern Frost Mountains. Population, mostly goats. Temperature, uninhabitable. The Duke reportedly cried. Lucien stared at the official decree in stunned silence and then slowly looked toward Cassian. Did you exile a nobleman because he interrupted me yesterday? Cassian calmly sipped tea. He breathed disrespectfully in your direction. That is not a real crime. It should be. Lucien had to physically turn away to hide his laughter. The nearby servants looked deeply tired. Unfortunately, this only encouraged him. Lucien discovered the Emperor would do almost anything if asked dramatically enough. One evening during dinner, Lucien sighed tragically while staring out the palace window. Cassian immediately looked concerned. What happened? I want strawberries. Cassian paused. They are out of season. Lucien looked devastated. Tragic. 3 days later, the Imperial Army invaded a southern kingdom famous for winter agriculture. Official reason? Trade dispute. Actual reason? Lucien wanted strawberries. The palace staff learned this when Cassian personally arrived carrying an entire crystal tray of imported fruit like a victorious hunter returning from war. Lucien stared at the strawberries, then at the Emperor, then back at the strawberries. You conquered territory for produce? Cassian gently fed him one. You looked sad. The ministers in the corner looked spiritually defeated. At this point, the palace servants had privately started calling Lucien the Empire's final boss. Not even secretly anymore. One maid accidentally said it aloud. Cassian looked proud. Lucien laughed for 20 minutes. Their daily life slowly devolved into complete circus behavior. The Emperor canceled court meetings to cuddle. Literally. One morning, Duke Silas Evermore arrived with urgent reports regarding border unrest, only to find the Emperor lounging lazily on a palace sofa, while Lucien napped against his chest. Your Majesty, Silas said carefully. The council meeting began 30 minutes ago. Cassian stroked Lucien's silver hair absent-mindedly. Reschedule it. This is an emergency. Cassian lowered his voice dangerously. And this is my husband. Lucien opened one eye sleepily. We're not married. Cassian looked down at him calmly. Yet. Silas suddenly understood why the palace physician drank heavily. Cassian's possessiveness also became increasingly unreasonable. One servant accidentally served Lucien cold soup. The servant was imprisoned for culinary hostility. Lucien had to personally free the poor man. Another time, a noblewoman criticized Lucien's dramatic fashion choices during court. The next morning, her family estate mysteriously lost tax privileges. Coincidentally? Probably. Lucien stared at the documents. You cannot punish people every time they annoy me. Cassian looked genuinely confused. But that's my favorite hobby. Honestly, fair enough. The worst incident happened during a diplomatic banquet. Foreign dignitaries from several kingdoms attended, including Prince Rowan Vane of Eris. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Rowan made one fatal mistake. He smiled at Lucien. That was it, just smiled politely. But because Lucien looked devastatingly beautiful in black obsidian armor lined with silver chains and dark silk gloves, the moment accidentally felt intimate enough to start a war. Cassian noticed immediately, and then stared at Rowan the entire banquet like he was planning 12 separate murders simultaneously. The atmosphere became unbearable. Several ambassadors started sweating. One servant dropped wine out of fear. Even Rowan eventually looked nervous. Later that night, Lucien found Cassian standing silently beside the palace balcony. Looking murderous, Lucien leaned casually against the doorway. You're sulking. Cassian's crimson eyes narrowed slightly. Why was he looking at you? Lucien blinked. Because I'm beautiful. Cassian went silent, then reluctantly nodded once. Correct. Lucien smirked victoriously. Cassian continued coldly. Still unacceptable. Lucien burst into laughter so violently he nearly fell backward off the balcony chair. Except Cassian caught him instantly, one arm around his waist. Steady, secure, like he'd already expected Lucien to fall. Actually, he probably had. Lucien looked up at him while still laughing breathlessly. Cassian looked down at him with terrifying softness. For a brief moment, neither moved. The moonlight caught Cassian's golden hair, making him look almost heavenly despite the fact he was currently threatening international diplomacy through eye contact alone. Lucien Diaz suddenly became very aware of how close they were. Annoyingly aware. Cassian smiled faintly. There you are. Lucien frowned. Where am I? Cassian gently brushed silver hair away from his face. Looking at me like you love me. Lucien immediately shoved him away in horror. Absolutely not. Cassian's smile only widened. He already knew. By now, the entire empire had accepted several unavoidable truths. Their general could ask for mountains and the emperor would conquer them. Their emperor would burn kingdoms over minor inconveniences. And somehow, despite the daily chaos, sarcasm, possessiveness, threats, political disasters, and emotionally unstable romance, the two of them were disgustingly happy. Which honestly terrified everyone the most. Chapter 4. The Tyrant's Beloved. Months passed. Then somehow an entire year disappeared beneath chaos, war meetings, sarcastic arguments, cuddling-induced political delays, and Lucien repeatedly threatening international relations because he was bored. And somewhere during all of it, something terrifying happened. This world became home. The palace no longer felt cold. The servants adored him despite the fact he regularly insulted their curtain choices dramatically. The soldiers worshipped him after he personally retrained half the imperial army while verbally destroying everyone's self-esteem. You fight like wet bread. General, please. Silence. Your sword posture offended me emotionally. Shockingly, morale improved afterward. Lucien fit into the role of general perfectly. Too perfectly. Sometimes it scared him. Orders came naturally. Battle strategy felt instinctive. Even the old memories no longer felt foreign. It was as if this world had always belonged to him. Or perhaps he had always belonged to it. And then there was Cassian. Cassian, who worshipped him openly now. The terrifying emperor no longer even pretended otherwise. Entire court meetings turned into Cassian staring lovingly at Lucien, pretending not to notice ministers contemplating death. One minister once whispered, "Does His Majesty blink anymore?" Another answered, "Only when the general leaves the room." Honestly, accurate. And Lucien, against all logic, liked it. A lot, actually. Which was deeply unfortunate for his dignity. One snowy evening, the palace was unusually quiet. No ministers. No war councils. No assassination attempts. Just soft candlelight flickering across Lucien's chambers while snow fell outside the windows. Lucien looked up from his book when Cassian entered. The emperor crossed the room slowly, then knelt before him. Lucien froze. No audience, no royal ceremony, no witnesses, only them. The mighty emperor of Edivane lowered his head slightly and asked quietly, "Will you stay beside me forever?" For once, Cassian sounded uncertain. Not possessive, not obsessive, just vulnerable. Lucien stared at him silently, then sighed dramatically. "You're insane," Cassian answered immediately. "For you." Lucien closed his eyes like a man enduring terrible suffering, then pointed lazily at him. "Fine. But if the wedding decorations are ugly, I'm leaving." Cassian stood instantly. Understood. By morning, the entire palace had been redesigned overnight, including imported crystal chandeliers, 3 new gardens, and gold-trimmed silk banners personally approved by Lucien after rejecting 14 previous designs for being visually disappointing. The continent nearly collapsed upon hearing the news of their marriage. The terrifying Tyrant Emperor had married his equally terrifying general. Foreign kingdoms immediately increased military funding, just in case. Their married life somehow became even more chaotic, which nobody thought was possible. Cassian canceled official meetings to cuddle with Lucien. Repeatedly. Duke Silas once arrived with urgent documents only to find the emperor carrying Lucien around the palace because his feet looked tired. Lucien wasn't even walking before that. Meanwhile, Lucien abused his husband's obsession shamelessly. Cassian. Yes, beloved. I hate that mountain. 3 weeks later, the mountain belonged to the empire. Lucien blinked at the conquest reports. You cannot annex geography because I complained aesthetically. Cassian kissed his forehead calmly. I can if it displeases you. The servants had simply accepted their fate at this point. And then came their wedding night. The grand celebrations lasted 3 days. The final night ended with Lucien still wearing pieces of ceremonial jewelry, while Cassian cornered him against the palace doors with crimson eyes burning dangerously soft. You smell happy, Cassian murmured against his throat. Lucien rolled his eyes weakly despite the blush creeping across his face. That's because I survived the wedding. Cassian's hands tightened possessively around his waist. You survived me. Lucien smirked lazily. Debatable. The rest of the night disappeared behind silk curtains, soft laughter, possessive pheromones, whispered promises, and a passion intense enough to leave bruises like devotion painted across pale skin. And for the first time in both their lives, neither of them felt alone anymore. A year and a half later, the palace descended into panic again, because Lucien Apache fainted during military training. One moment he was screaming at soldiers for holding spears incorrectly. The next, he collapsed dramatically into Cassian's arms. Naturally, the Emperor nearly murdered everyone present, including the physician. If something happened to him, Your Majesty, he is just pregnant. Silence. Complete silence. Cassian blinked once, then slowly looked down at Lucien sleeping against him. Pregnant? The physician nodded nervously. With the imperial heir. Cassian immediately started crying. Actually crying. The servants were horrified. The kingdom celebrated for 7 straight days. Meanwhile, Lucien woke up later and learned the Emperor had already commissioned 12 portraits of the unborn baby, redesigned the nursery, 6 times threatened 3 neighboring kingdoms just in case, and banned stress within 50 feet of Lucien pregnancy made Cassian worse. Much worse. His Enigma pheromones constantly wrapped around Lucien possessively like an invisible warning sign. One minister accidentally startled Lucien during his 5th month. Cassian exiled him before breakfast. Lucien sighed while eating fruit. You can't exile people every time I get surprised. Cassian calmly peeled oranges for him. He frightened my pregnant husband. He sneezed. A violent act. Lucien laughed so hard he nearly fell off the chair again. Cassian caught him instantly. Obviously. Prince Aurelian Vale was born during the first snowfall of winter. Beautiful, tiny, golden-eyed like Cassian, with Lucien's silver hair. The Emperor looked at his son once before immediately looking back at Lucien. Only Lucien. Always Lucien. You stayed, Cassian whispered hoarsely beside the bed. Lucien, exhausted and emotional, reached up weakly and grabbed his robes. Obviously, he muttered. Cassian kissed his hand like a man worshipping something sacred. The Empire celebrated the birth of their heir, but the palace staff quickly realized the real problem. Cassian's obsession had evolved into fatherhood-enhanced insanity. Nobody was allowed within 10 feet of Lucien or the baby without permission. One guard accidentally looked at the infant too long. Cassian reassigned him to another continent. The unspoken tales. One quiet winter night, snow drifted softly outside the palace windows. Lucien slept peacefully in bed with little Aurelian curled against his chest. Cassian sat nearby silently watching them. His overwhelming Enigma pheromones wrapped around the room protectively, like a monster guarding treasure. Then he remembered. The first death. That war tent soaked in candlelight and blood. Lucien collapsing while laughing weakly. Poison slowly destroying his body. Even dying, Lucien had still tried to insult the enemy commander. Your outfit is so ugly it nearly killed me before the poison did. Then he collapsed. Cassian remembered screaming. Not human screaming. Something feral, something monstrous. The Empire drowned in blood afterward. The Chamberlain Cedric Hollow was executed publicly. The spy attendants were torn apart. Traitors. Enemies. Entire noble families vanished overnight. Kingdoms burned. Cassian killed everyone involved personally. But revenge changed nothing. Lucien still wouldn't wake up. His body remained trapped in endless sleep, so Cassian preserved it. For 3 unbearable years, the palace became a mausoleum, and Cassian became something terrifying. The High Mage Elias Thorne once begged him, Your Majesty, please let him rest. Cassian nearly killed him for saying it. Then finally, the Imperial Mages discovered the horrifying truth. Lucien's soul still existed, but it had been forcibly thrown into another world. Earth. One of the enemy's spies had completed an ancient ritual moments before dying. If Lucien's soul remained there long enough, he would never return. So Cassian forced the Imperial mages to retrieve him. Even after learning the consequences, the ritual would erase memories. Lucien would forget his past life here, forget the Empire, forget being general, possibly even forget Cassian himself. The mages hesitated. Cassian didn't. Because to him there was no choice. He could survive hatred, madness, war, but not losing Lucien twice. So the ritual began. For 3 years, Cassian remained beside Lucien's sleeping body, speaking to him, holding him, waiting. Until finally Lucien woke up again believing he had simply transmigrated accidentally through a mysterious book. Cassian never corrected him, never told him the truth. Because this way Lucien smiled again, laughed again, loved again, and Cassian would rather be hated forever than risk losing that happiness. Some things were better left unsaid. Back in the present, Lucien stirred slightly in his sleep. Half awake, he reached instinctively toward Cassian. Cassian immediately gathered him carefully into his arms. Lucien mumbled sleepily against his shoulder. "You're staring again. Creepy." Cassian pressed a gentle kiss against his forehead, the same way he had the first day Lucien awakened, then whispered quietly, "I found you again." Lucien never heard it, or perhaps some small, forgotten part of him did. Because half asleep, Lucien's fingers tightened weakly around Cassian's robes like someone terrified of losing him too. Outside the palace windows, snow continued falling silently over the empire that once burned for love. Months later, little Aurelian finally learned how to crawl, which unfortunately turned the palace into a battlefield. Cassian followed the child around like an armed bodyguard. Lucien laughed so hard daily that servants feared for his health. One afternoon, while chasing Aurelian through old palace corridors, Lucien discovered a hidden room. Inside rested countless old belongings, among them a diary. The original general's diary. Lucien opened it curiously. Most pages contained insults directed toward nobles. One entry simply read, "Today, I made a duke cry by criticizing his curtains. Productive morning." Lucien snorted. Definitely him. But then he reached the final page and froze. Only one unfinished sentence remained there. "If I ever return someday." The ink abruptly stopped, like the writer never got the chance to finish it. Lucien stared silently at the page, then slowly touched his chest. For the first time since transmigrating, something hurt. Not physically. Something deeper. A strange grief, longing, like missing something he couldn't remember, like standing at the edge of a forgotten dream. Behind him, the door quietly opened. Cassian entered silently carrying Aurelian in his arms. Their eyes met. Cassian smiled softly. Lucien smiled back automatically. But the diary remained open between them, and for one long moment neither of them spoke. Outside, snow continued falling over the imperial palace, and somewhere deep inside Lucien's soul, something ancient stirred awake.